We're going to find a solution to the meta problem on Football Manager 26. All the best meta tactics adopt a similar strikerless system with high press and a low defensive line. But what happens if every single team in the league is using a meta tactic? Well, we'll manage one team in the league and play against the meta-powered AI teams. And by the end of this video, you'll be empowered with principles that will help you destroy the meta on Football Manager 26. After playing against the meta for a while, I have a number of theories that guided what I feel are the principles that you need to deal with the meta on Football Manager. The first one was I noticed that when you're playing against the meta, you're going to concede a good number of goals from set pieces, which is something a lot of people don't really pay attention to. Set pieces are really crucial for how the meta works in the game. Now, I know that it's a strikerless system and they have a back three, but we're going to come to that very soon. The first thing you need to deal with when you're trying to go against the meta is to prepare for their set piece goals, particularly from throwings. What the meta tactic tends to do is that they'll go ahead and take a short throw. It's not a long throwing. They're going to take a short throw to a player that's very good at dribbling, and the player is going to just make a darting run into the box and maybe play a cut back to somebody else that's going to score a simple tap in inside the penalty area. To combat this, what I had to do was go into my set piece defending and then alter all the set pieces. I removed all the zonal markings and then turned every player and asked them to just play a mark. Zonally marking in a throwing is not very useful, to be honest, so I asked all my central defenders that were zonally marking to just go ahead and play a mark. Then I left only 3 players to defend and then moved everybody to play as trackers, then set all of them to play as player markers. The next thing to deal with is the defensive shape of the meta. Now, for this process, I tried my best not to get too hung up on the formations. When you're trying to deal with the meta, you have to think about the principles that actually make the meta work. And that way you can go about using any single formation you want to use to play against the meta. But what I noticed was very significant in this setup is that they have 3 central defenders. And what that means is if you do not have enough bodies to actually overwhelm the central defenders, you're going to have a lot of trouble breaking the opposition's defense down. So what I started with was a 4-2-3-1 narrow system where the wide attackers are now playing as number 10. So I had 3 number 10s and then 1 center forward. But I kid you not, this did not help us a great deal in the game. I don't think it's really down to the formation itself. It was more like we didn't have the principles set down. So even when I was using that formation, it didn't really do us much good. They were still breaking us down and scoring us from other areas. So one thing you need to take into account is that you need to have the numbers up front to deal with the back three that the opposition has, that they're defending with in their low block. Still on the shape, we're going to look at the attacking shape of the meta. Now, this is really important as to how the meta works. The meta adopts a strikerless system. What this means is their center forward is actually playing as a number 10. Now, the problem with Football Manager 26 is that the central defenders in your team would not adequately cover the run of the number 10. They would not see him as a striker. The central defender in FM26 has been wired to take care of the opposition striker. And in the meta system, they do not have a striker, or essentially the striker is playing in a much deeper position that the opposition or that your central defenders will not take into account. What I did first to actually deal with this problem was to ask my central defenders to close down much less and not get dragged out of position, because sometimes they will be in a confusion state where they have to get drawn out to deal with the number 10, or they'll just stay back. So what I did was ask them to play with a standard defensive line and then ask them to close down much less. It helped us sometimes, but it wasn't as effective as the second trick, because I did notice that the striker would, even though we're closing him less, he could just get into the box and then they will play across and it's going to score a simple header. So to deal with that, what I noticed has worked effectively for me and got me more wins consistently against the strikerless system was actually play one central defender as a stopping central defender and the other central defender as a cover central defender. That is something I did not like to do in FM, but I noticed against the meta, it has actually worked for me. Now, the stopping and the cover central defender is an out of possession player instruction. It's not an in possession. In possession, I kind of left them both as normal central defenders. To further deal with the number 10, which is the striker of the opposition that is playing as a central attacking midfielder, I went on to ask one of my defensive midfielders to adequately tight mark this player. So you have to manually do this. By default, your players may not know that they're supposed to actually track this other player. I don't really go deep into opposition instructions, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. When it comes to the player instruction, you have to go into your DM, one of your DMs, pick the guy that has the best marking if you can. Go ahead into his internal player out of possession instruction and then ask him to specifically mark the opposition's number 10. This was how I was able to deal with the striker problem in the meta. However, there was still another problem of the wingers. So if you go ahead and mark the striker, the wingers are sort of free to roam. So what I did to actually deal with the wingers was to ask my 2 fullbacks to go ahead and type mark. Not that I asked them to specifically type mark the opposition's wingers. I just turned on the type mark instruction for them. And then when it came to the team instructions, I went to my team instructions and asked the team to stop crosses. Now, most meta systems that you kind of use, or what they tell you to use in FM24, is to invite crosses. But against the meta, I promise you, that did not work. To further deal with the crosses, I went on to ask my team to defend narrow. Now, to do this, you have to go into your out of possession team instructions and go into pressing traps and show the oppositions outside. This is essentially asking your team to stay in a compressed middle block, kind of in the central area, and then force the ball to go outside. That way you can go ahead and stop the crosses, because this is how the meta tends to score. If they're not using the striker, they're going to use the wingers to try and cut inside and play a cutback for the center forward or even the defensive midfielder or central midfielder to get into the box and score a tap in. Now, with the way we were set up, the meta is so good, so I tried to be a bit more defensive and go for a cautious and defensive mentality to try and deal with their long balls over the top. But what I noticed is that kind of causes a huge problem and exposes one of the strengths of the meta that a lot of people may not really notice. Now, the meta has 3 center backs, and if you're not pressing the center backs or kind of overwhelming them, the center backs are going to have way too much time on the ball, and they are playing with a high, what's that word? They're playing with a direct passing and high tempo. So the center backs of your position would actually go ahead to play long passes into your defense and then try to find a striker, and then they're going to have a shot on goal. So to deal with this, I actually had to go ahead and press the opposition high up the pitch. Now, this is not just high press and low tempo trying to deal with the meta or anything like that. I actually had to ask my team to play with the high press, and then I moved the defensive line much higher. That way we are forcing teams back. But I kid you not, I tried every other instruction to try and be more logical in defending the meta. It didn't really work out. They had too much time on the ball. They had all the time to play possession and play long passes into our defense. So I noticed that the best way to keep them at bay was to actually keep them in their own box. So you may not always be able to deal with the long passes, but what I noticed that a simple trick actually helped me here was to switch my goalkeeper from playing as a standard goalkeeper to play as a super keeper out of possession. Their long passes was easy for the goalkeeper to come out on track. Often he didn't really get the ball and then the striker would still be through on goal, but it did at least give us some fighting chance. Now, I've spoken extensively about how to defend against the meta, and hopefully everything that you've heard here would give you at least a fighting chance against the meta. But how did we go about breaking them down and scoring goals? Now, I kid you not, at the beginning of the stage that I played with Rapid Vienna, I kind of lost every single game in the league. I think we drew once and then lost all 4 times as at match day 5. We're bottom of the league. So I already knew that the challenge was up against me and we had to find a way to score goals. The balance didn't really help us here. Cautious mentality didn't really help us. But in order for you to get chances and score goals, you actually need to come out and play against meta. Defending didn't really work out. So how do we go about breaking them down? But what I noticed is that if you play a short passing low tempo, you will not be able to break down the meta because they are going to be in a low block of 5 defenders and 2 defensive midfielders. They have enough bodies to defend for long periods of time. So you holding on to the ball in low possession trying to find space, you will not find space because there is no space. They're playing with a low tempo. You have to find a way to move the ball a lot quicker. So what I did, rather than going for a high tempo style of play, is actually switch the passing to a normal passing directness and a normal tempo. But I went ahead to switch the mentality to an attacking mentality. That way we were able to move the ball around quickly and without forcing it too much. Not only did this help us keep possession in the opposition half, but we were able to move them around and start scoring goals. Now, I plan to play the save up until March of the following season to see how far we were able to go. There's still a lot of work that you can actually do, but so far so good. I have seen what the meta has done consistently in how many games, and I've seen that these are the problems that you're going to have to face in the meta. There's set pieces, the centre backs having too much time on the ball, the striker being the problem, and your defenders not being able to mark him basically. So most of what I've shared with you today is going to help you build any system at all that you want, and then go ahead and put these personal instructions in there, and it should give you a fighting chance against the meta. On a final note, I will speak about the mentality and the opposition instructions. For the mentality, I had a lot more success playing with an attacking mentality. The one time that I went on to use the defensive mentality, we went on to hold on for quite a bit against some grass, but eventually they equalized the game and went on to win the game 2-1. Now, I don't really think it's down to the mentality. I just feel like when it comes to defensive and cautious mentality, you're inviting a lot of pressure from the AI, and they're going to be very aggressive with the tactics that they're using. They're playing meta, of course. So the only way to actually combat them in that scenario is to go ahead pound for pound, kind of hit them on the attacking foot, keep them on the back foot as well. That way you're not inviting a lot more pressure onto yourself, and then you may not go ahead and crack. As for opposition instructions, I noticed that leaving the opposition instructions screen completely blank was what helped me a lot. I love using opposition instructions, but against the meta, the system is constantly moving, so using opposition instructions might cause you to have your players get dragged out of position. So what I tend to do is leave the screen blank and then go into internal player instructions and then enable some specific player instructions. Like I mentioned, the defensive midfielder going ahead to mark the opposition's attacking midfielder. Those sort of instructions work well for me, but then going on to apply the opposition instructions in the other screen didn't really help out that much. If you've played against the meta on Football Manager 26, do let me know how you went about it. Did you go ahead and win a lot of games? And what did you do differently?